I'd been studying with Gordon Krosky, guitar teacher in Manchester, and I carried on my college, also in Manchester, also with Gordon, still as my teacher. And I'd already studied with Gordon for 4 years. And Gordon was the first person to say to me, well, maybe we've gone through what we need to go through. Maybe you could go to somebody else. But honestly, at that time, there were two things. One, I didn't particularly have an idea of another type of guitar teacher than Gordon. He was perfectly fine as far as I was concerned in the way that I was going, generally speaking, and guitaristically speaking. But on the other hand, I'd also heard from a friend of mine who'd left the music school prior to college. He left 1 year early to go to college. And I bumped into him at college while I was still at school, and he was telling me about this incredible teacher, Greek teacher who taught all instruments. And he said, it's amazing. He was a violinist. I played the third Mozart concerto for him through. And you know, he spent 3 hours on the first 2 bars. And this is a guy, you've no idea what this guy can teach. It's unbelievable. And he was telling me, he spent about half an hour telling me about this Greek teacher, whose name I didn't capture. It was some, and so when I went to college, I think I had in the back of my mind, honestly, the memory of this thing, that there was some teacher there that was very special. And so I was looking for a piano teacher. I'd had a marvelous one, by the way, also in Manchester, and insisted on having her because I'd heard her pupils, I'd heard her playing, and I said, no, I need that piano teacher. She was a very difficult teacher, but she was marvelous. Narina Haratunian, daughter of a very famous composer, Alexander Haratunian, one of the main Armenian composers after Khachachurian. She was an incredible virtuoso pianist and very, very demanding. Mm-hmm. So for guitarists in Brazil, she had the kind of Sergio Abreu approach to building up technique, for example, very slowly and very meticulously, and very, very, demanding of the students. And so I wanted to carry on my studies with piano, and they didn't. The course that I was taking, they didn't necessarily give you a piano teacher. I said, well, there isn't any space, but you might try this Greek teacher called George Hagianikos, and he's there because he sometimes takes second study pianists. He listens to everybody. You might try him. And I went into George's room there. He was sitting on his own. And he recognized me. He'd seen me on the BBC competition, playing the concerto. He liked it a lot. He liked the guitar. He had taught guitarists in the past. And he said, oh, you played really well. And actually, the final was, there's a winner of the strings, a winner of the keyboard, etc., and etc. So that was the final that he saw playing Rodrigo Concerto. And he was so enthusiastic about that, and told me his life story over about 3 hours. His meeting with Heinrich Neuhaus. And I've been always reading Neuhaus's book, The Art of Piano Playing, which is one of my favorite books on music. Neuhaus, and I was like, you know about Neuhaus? And he was so happy to have this kind of interaction, I think, also. And also the people he mentioned, he'd been close with Edwin Fischer, all these great people from the past. And then he played piano for me, and I almost fell off my chair, the way he played the piano, the sound that he could get. And I said, how do you create that sound? He said, oh, we can discuss about that later. It was a great topic for him, But he was the person who could inspire amazing things in his students. And he had a very, what we thought of as a kind of Socratic approach, in the sense that he wouldn't just give you the answer. He would try and, through questioning and answer, through dialogue, he would try and provoke you to find the answer yourself. And this was very often a very, very long, drawn-out process. It wasn't something that you could do in one neat little hour. His lessons were Homerically long, and covered the whole spectrum. It would be Greek literature, it would be philosophy, everything would be taken in. And it wasn't for everybody. Some people found that just way too much. They just wanted an hour of piano lesson, thank you very much. And then they'll go on to something else. With Hagianikos, it was a complete, almost a kind of a way of life, really, that music and life were inseparable. Who you were and how you played were one thing, basically. And so this was the depth to which he went, and he was like that. To me, fantastic. George really was music. He personified it, and He had a tremendous generosity, the most generous person you could ever meet. He would just, he would take a pupil and take them for days and days and days and help them. And I was always thinking he's a virtuoso pianist, he should be practicing instead of teaching so much. But he was a real giver. He loved people, he loved dialogue. He was always laughing and provoking laughter in everyone. So he lightened the whole situation. College could be very, very heavy, dark, and full of angst. And he was the person who lightened everything. And people came out of his classes laughing and feeling that life was totally different.
E eu acho muito legal uma universidade estar aberta a professor desses, né?
Well, it was. I mean, he was in conflict with that college. They weren't comfortable with someone like that around because, he provoked ideas. He provoked people to think for themselves, to start to be kind of rebellious. To go against the normal things, the accepted norms. And to do more extraordinary things. The other part of the story is the fact that George's open class, he took in quartets, pianists, violinists, everybody, singers also, ensembles, and the repertoire was right across the whole spectrum. And he was always talking about the relation of movement and sound, the way that a violinist, for example, takes a bow and moves around into a note, and the curve and that space between the notes is articulated through the movement, so you feel that curve. I mean, imagine a sigh, for example. That curve there is can be, expressed physically through the technique. So it becomes a kind of physical technique, that area. And on the guitar, I was feeling kind of always limited because the amount of movement that you can create isn't directly the hand, the fingers on the strings. I was doing it sort of indirectly through the left arm. But I began to think, what if, I could have a way of sitting where I could have this movement directly in relation to sound as a pianist does, or violinist or cellist, etc. And that was really the beginning of the thought process. And at the same time, I was also doing Alexander technique and yoga and concerned about posture to some extent as well, to sit well, and not to be, trying to sit. It's always a complicated position to sit well in, that you are one is able to do it, but it's not so easy. After this thing I was talking about and starting to deeply question my approach, etc. At the same time, I was also making decisions of what not to do. For example, there was a lot of pressure to go in for another competition, especially the Toronto competition at that time. Everybody was saying, you must go in for that competition. There's a huge pressure. And I remember for about 4 days thinking about that on my own, thinking this is one of those moments in life where you can go this way or you can go this way. Because if I went to that competition, I think I would still be playing this way. And some people might think that I would have been a better guitarist, who knows. But at that point I said, no, for this change to really take place, I need to get rid of everything. And I need to find some solutions which no one's going to be able to give me from the outside. So I had an Easter holiday where I just spent 3 weeks walking and thinking and coming to the conclusion it's not possible. I can't think of a way that this is going to be. So my parents used to go to the lovely island, the Isles of Scilly, off the south coast of England for Easter holidays. Lovely place. They used to rent a little flat there, and we used to walk on the beach. It's very beautiful. And so I went back on my own because I had 2 concerts, quite important concerts to play, 2 concertos. One of which was live on Radio 3, BBC Radio 3, which was playing for the first time the Lennox Berkeley Guitar Concerto, and a couple of days before playing the Ponce Concerto also, both of them in Scotland. And so this was now about 10 days before those 2 concerts. And I was on my own coming through my grandmother's place. She was also on Scilly, so I was there on my own. And I was watching just that evening the television, and there was just, as the adverts were there, I took the guitar and started playing. And then looked at what I had there, sitting on the floor, and I realized, this is it. This is it, because now my arms are free, and the legs were perfectly comfortable holding the guitar. That was really my eureka moment. I understood then what people mean by that, eureka in Greek, that you really, like a lightning bolt, through your life. That was one of the great moments in my life when
Caiu a maçã caiu na sua cabeça.
Exactly.
A maçã do
Exactly.
Newton.
and that was the turning point. I was so excited. I mean, I was dancing around the house, because I felt this is it for me. And sure enough, I played those 2 concerts sitting on the floor in that position immediately. And you might think that, well, that's a little bit scatterbrained for someone to immediately do that. I should have, been more cautious about things. But I really felt immediately that I was playing better. I really did. And the critic in Glasgow for the BBC, who had heard me previously quite a lot, he'd sort of followed my progress, said he felt that I was playing better in this new position. He said that in the critic as well, which was very nice to read, in fact.
Mas eu queria ver o maestro a hora que você...
He was very gracious.
Você botava tapete no chão, isso?
Exactly, yeah. He was very, very gracious about it.
Tirava o sapato?
Yes, you couldn't play with shoes.
E o maestro de casaca lá?
Yeah, yes, everyone very formal. And I was there sitting on the floor with my guitar, and I felt so comfortable and so domestic, And there was a huge audience out there in the main hall in Glasgow with the BBC there. I couldn't tell you how relaxed I felt.
Wow.
Playing for the first time the Belenglis Guitar Concerto live on radio.
Wow.
It was quite strange. And that was really the beginning, a very nice beginning. And for the whole of that year, that first year, it was a wonderful period for me, basically, because that was the year that I later went to Brazil for the first time. I met Celia, who became my wife, of course. And I went to Greece for the first time with George and played for the first time in his festival. I mean, it was like, everything was beginning. It was the kind of the spring, everything was flowering for me.
Demais.
And it was a tremendous period, a very, very sort of fertile period in my life. And so right through those 2 years, but after 2 years, I began to dig deeper into what I could do with this position and articulate those wings that I have in a particular way, and the wrist could go this way and the other way. And I never forget a thing that George used to tell me about his teacher for a while. He had many, many teachers, but one of his teachers was Edward Erdmann, who had been a pupil of Schnabel, a marvelous pianist. And he said the story about he was on the cusp of his career, and he had his debut with Nikisch and the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra to play a concerto, Edward Erdmann, right? And he was days before that debut, and had a lesson with Schnabel. And Schnabel just said, this wrist thing, you can articulate in this way and this way, this way, and then you get the phrase. Just something very simple like that. Sounds innocuous, But it was enough for Edmund to suddenly be thrown into a complete chaos. Just that movement of the wrist meant that all of a sudden he felt absolutely incapable of playing the piano. He felt like a complete beginner. And he felt absolutely suicidal before this debut concert because he felt, I'm just hopeless now. I just can't do anything. Nothing worked. Just from that one movement. It sounds an odd thing, but this is a true story. And something a little bit along those lines happened to me about 2 years in, that I suddenly, digging deeper into what I was able to do, began to feel that insecurity, that I couldn't suddenly deal with the instrument and the confidence that I had before. And I was suddenly, things were thrown out of balance. And that was a very difficult year for me, extremely difficult. It was the year that I actually finished college, and people were beginning to react to what I was doing quite strongly. It was no longer a little nice thing which might last for a little time and then he'll go back to the real thing.
Wow.
He'd been doing it for 2 years. Maybe this is serious and shouldn't be tolerated. This is
Tá indo longe demais.
Yeah, much too rebellious. Yes, this is the thing of the fact that you really, the further back in the arm, Neuhaus used to talk a lot about this in his book. His description was quite useful in some ways. It's a militaristic sort of simile he uses, but it's actually very useful. He used to talk about the fingers being the kind of soldiers at the front. But the further back you go, the more you get the general, you get the, you know, you get the overall view and the strategy that can guide the campaign of those foot soldiers at the front, right? So very often we think just here, as you say, we're very, very concerned about fingers, fingers, fingers. But if we're able to go backwards, the strength really is increased the further back you go. You're able to do with just one movement here, you know, what so many movements do there, and be able to actually to organize groupings of notes, phrases, etc., sentences from a single movement. And so the use of the wrists, I think, is, well, it's not only me, of course, that thinks this. It's a whole tradition, especially in string playing. Kreisler always used to say, and Casals as well, that the lungs of the string player are in the wrist. They breathe there. And a wonderful story again of, which is pertinent to this, and might be a little bit of a parenthesis, but when he was beginning cello, the orthodoxy for cello technique in his youth was that you had to have books under your arms and practice this way to avoid movement. And he found this dreadful, and he rebelled against that, and probably was heavily criticized for doing it, but throwing away those books and using that movement, because not only was it not beneficial, but it was very positive in phrasing and articulation. And the other wonderful story on the other side, another parenthesis, is Chopin, who developed to a very, very sophisticated degree this relation of movement and sound, the articulation, etc. But when he was a young pianist, he went to Paris to study with Kalkbrenner, who was the virtuoso of the time.
Aluno do Liszt.
Yes, in the Liszt line. And Kalkbrenner had invented this thing where you had a wooden sort of bar just beyond the keyboard, where you would rest your arms, right, and you would play here. So that, again, minimize absolutely the movement, so that you would have a completely static approach behind the fingers. And Chopin, again, as soon as he saw that, and had one lesson with Galpão, he said, this is not only not for me, but I want to do the absolute opposite of this, you know. It's absolutely, I want absolute freedom in order to articulate everything. And this is very much the line that I started developing, and it's very interesting that in playing this way, when I talk to a cellist or a violinist about the relationship of articulation and my posture, they take it as a given. So, of course, I mean, it's this, but if, as you say, in guitaristic terms, it's strange, because because of the posture, the approach to the posture, the emphasis is in a different direction. It's a totally different direction. It does tend to be more finger orientated, and so obviously, I think when there are limitations, you might say, "Oh, those limitations, close a kind of a door." But in the arts, it's very often the case that limitations are stimulants as well for creativity. And so, for example, when you see Segovia placing his arm there, it's amazing what he's able to do to compensate for that situation.
Claro.
Those limitations provoke him.
Funciona todo relaxado, ombro todo solto.
Two fantastic things. And one of the things, one of the logical reactions of my parents was looking. I remember the very day, for example, that I put my spike into my guitar was the day Segovia died. It just so happened that way. It was the very day he died. Wow. And I came back. I was staying with my parents at the time. I came back from the local village there in Edinburgh, just outside Edinburgh, where my parents lived, with a new spike, very proud of that. And on the television, they were showing Segovia, one of the films of Segovia, in homage that evening. And they, quite normally, and there's a very healthy reaction, I think, watching Segovia playing so marvelously, and turned around to me and said, "What's so wrong with that?"